Mensch, das hat es allein so geweckt. In wahrlich tanzt nicht mit dir. In wahrlich tanzt nicht mit dir. Wer ist die Ohren? Meinst du, sie hat so geweckt? Ein Mensch schwimmt sich in der Heim. In wahrlich bin ich moide zu dir. Nur meine Vater suchst die, als ich habe so geweckt. Nein. Wie hast du so geweckt? Ich schwimmt sich mit jedem zweiten Mensch. Und ich darf mittanzen mit dir. Nein. Was? Jetzt hat er ganz gut gesagt, nicht? Ich weck dich.
Pesachim Daf Zayin Amud Aleph. around 15 lines from the top. The line starts Shma Mina. There's 2 dots, and a new sugya begins. Amar Rabba bar Rav Huna, Amar Rav. After the Gemarah concluded explaining why Rav taught us that we have to do bittul after bdikas chametz, in case we find in the middle of Pesach a nice roll, and if we do not do bittul, we can run into many a problem. So now the Gemarah explores a new situation. And this is a very interesting situation, which is hard for us today to imagine, just to give a little intro, because today we immediately recognize the difference between chametz and matzah as a result of various differences that are usually present in chametz versus matzah, and conversely. But there were times, and even today in certain communities, where chametz and matzah seemed very similar. In fact, the matzah in Yemen and other places, where they still do matzah like pita bread. The matzah looks like pita, like falafel, pita bread. And very often, in earlier generations especially, the matzah was very thick. Matzah was thick, so often you have a situation, and this is what the Gemarah now addresses. You find a piece of bread in your house on Pesach, in the box that's designated for bread, and you don't know if it's chametz or matzah. Amar Rav bar Rav Huna, Amar Rav. Rabba, the son of Rav Huna, said in the name of Rav, Hapas she'ipsha, if you have bread that was spoiled, and you discover it on Pesach, in the designated, a person had a bread box where they would keep their bread a whole year, including on Pesach. And now he's in doubt what this bread is. And of course, there are many questions. Can he eat it? Does he have to destroy it? Does he have to eliminate it? Even if he doesn't want to eat it because it's spoiled, does he have to get rid of it? Or can he eat it? Sometimes a person is hungry, there's not enough food, you want to eat it, you want to feed it to your hungry children. So Apasha Ipsha, this bread got spoiled, says Rav, Kivon Sherov Samatza Muteres. What are the words Kivon Sherov Samatza? The way we understand it now is, because this is a box that was used more for matzah than for chametz, so therefore we follow statistics, and we assume that this is a piece of matzah, not a piece of chametz. Meaning, a person has to be aware and be able to say, throughout the last year, this box was a container for 100 pieces of matzah, 100 pieces of matzah, and 90 pieces of chametz. So statistically, a piece of bread that you find there, what would it be? You go according to the majority. Since in Torah we always follow the majority, so therefore if we say that according to statistics it's not 50-50, or I don't know, if I know that Rav sa matzah, so therefore in majority of situations this would be matzah, not chametz, according to statistics. Torah follows the majority, achri rabim lahatos, and therefore I could treat this as a piece of matzah. That's the chiddush of Rav. Sheipsha, yeah, it's spoiled. First of all, maybe it's from last Pesach, the matzah. You want to know how can it be spoiled and it's matzah. First of all, maybe the matzah was baked before Pesach. Maybe it's old matzah that was left over from last year Pesach. There could be different alternatives. But the point here is that if I know that Rav sa matzah, meaning the majority of the bread used in this container is matzah, yeah? 500 pieces of matzah, 400 pieces of chametz. So statistically, I follow the majority, and I say you don't know, you could go bus or ruba, you can go according to the majority. Rashi says, Kivan sherav sa matzah, kasol kedaitach. Im nishtamshu b'tei v'zu matzah yosem mechametz. The way we think, the way we understand Rav's words at the moment is, if in this box they used matzah more than chametz, right? Let's say 60% of the usage was matzah and 40% chametz, or even 55, whatever, even just the majority, any majority. Could be 51-49. But the majority of it was used for matzah, as linon, basa, ruba. We follow It's a statistics game. We follow Ruba, we follow the majority, Umoteres, and you can eat this piece as matzah.
What's the point of it being spoiled? I mean, what's the, I mean, if it's rave, fine. Whether it's Ipsha or not. You can, what, is it that you can't tell because it's Ipsha?
Probably you want to know why spoiled. Just say you find a piece of bread, right? L'chayda would be the same issue.
Right,
Yeah.
especially if it all looks like pita.
So practically, you would say it seems like you can't tell, because it's so spoiled, it's so old and so moldy. Very hard to tell. Even if there are identifying features, he can't know. That's probably what he means. In other words, the same concept exists in any situation. But practically speaking, that's how we would interpret it now. If it's spoiled and you simply can't tell, so you don't know what to do, so you follow the majority.
Not only that, the fact that it's spoiled, it most likely it's bread, and the fact that it's mixed with matzah, it most likely it was used during the year, because during Pesach we don't mix bread with matzah.
Of course not.
So,
This is the middle of Pesach. This is the middle of Pesach. If this box is never used for chametz, then you don't have a problem. But this box is used for bread a whole year. That's the issue. So therefore we don't know. So that's what we're saying. That if you you could count and you could say that the most pieces of bread that were in this container were matzah, not chametz. So then you follow that statistic and you say that this is matzah, even though it may be chametz. Gewaltige chiddush. It may be chametz, but you can treat it as matzah and eat it.
Is it really a bittul? Because chametz is not supposed to be bittul. Feel about it. You know what I'm saying? It's saying it's rove.
No, if you have chametz doesn't get bottle. But I don't have chametz. I don't know what it is. If I have chametz, there's no bittul in chametz on Pesach, even in 1,000. But here I have to establish what it is. You understand? So when I have to establish what it is, I follow the majority of situations and I say it's matzah. You're right. Once you would know it's chametz, there wouldn't be bittul beroiv. But here, when it comes to establishing what it is, I could follow the majority.
This is something he forgot to be vibrant. I mean, if it's used the whole year, you have to assume it's chametz because he didn't clear it out. It's used the whole year.
You want to know why he didn't do b'dikas chametz?
I mean, if he would have done it, because if he didn't do b'dikas chametz on this, you have to assume it's chametz because that's what he used it for a whole year. He didn't clear it out.
Well, he doesn't know. This is a Jew who did b'dikas chametz, but he doesn't know. Maybe he overlooked it. Maybe he doesn't know. That's part of his question. If he knows, he knows. We're talking about he doesn't know. He did b'dikas chametz, but he doesn't know. Asks the Gemarah, this is the statement. Now we have to analyze this. Hey Chidami, what are you talking about? If it's talking about the yada but the chametzi, if it's talking about that you look at this piece of bread and you know that it's chametz, well obviously kirov samatzah I have. The fact that you usually, in most cases, use this container for matzah is meaningless. In other words, the fact that this container is likely to have matzah versus chametz, great, but there's a piece of chametz. So he can't be talking about that. So now, of course, this is only a rhetorical introduction. The Gemarah didn't think that Rav thought that you look at something and you see it's chametz, but you could eat it. But it's leading us into the trap. Okay, Ella the loya dinem boy chametz uimatzo. Obviously, he's talking about doubt. Again, if you know it's chametz, you obviously got to get rid of it. If you know it's matzah, then I don't have a problem. It's matzah. The problem is I don't know. I can't recognize whether it's chametz or matzah. So now Rav is telling me, what do? You have a doubt. So what do? So I'm telling you, if you could know for sure that the majority of bread that is found in this box throughout the year is matzah, if you would take a count, you could follow that statistic and say matzah. Great. If that's the situation, my area, kirov samatzah. Why does Rav allow you to see it as matzah, relying on the condition that you're off samatzah, that the majority of bread that's used in this container, the majority of bread that lay in this container is matzah, meaning if not, if it's 50-50, or less, it's more chametz than matzah, or you don't know, I don't know how much, it's this, I don't know, 50-50, maybe not, I don't know, so I can't say it's a majority. In all these cases, Rav would say, throw it out. Certainly don't eat it. Get rid of it. Why? Afilu kiloirav samatsanami. Even if you know for sure that the majority of bread in this container is not matzah. Rav loy rav some matzah. It's not that the roiv is matzah. Nami. It should still be permissible. Why? Because nazel basa basra. We should follow basa basra, the last situation. We should follow the last step of the game. What do we mean? What is the meaning of the Gemarah here? Follow the last usage of the box. Let's explain. Now it's Pesach. You're a good Jew. This is an Erlechiyah. This is a Shema Torah mitzvahs, obviously. If not, this whole halacha doesn't apply. So that means he's not using the box now for chametz. The bread that he's putting in now, obviously, the new bread that he's putting in is not chametz. It's matzah. Okay. But you found a piece of bread and it was spoiled. So you don't know if it's chametz or matzah. So we're saying follow the majority. He says, why is negay the majority? Nazel basa basra. Follow the last usage of this box. What was the last usage of this box? Let's understand. When it comes to a type of thing that before you put in new, you take out the old, so we can assume that when you put in the new, you first cleaned out the old. Bread is such a thing. Why? Because if you put a new warm bread on top of old bread, it's going to spoil. So you'll first take out the old bread, and then you'll put in the new bread. So we're dealing with a type of thing when a person puts in fresh bread, new, fresh, warm bread in a box, generally, the appropriate thing, the natural thing to do is first clean it up from the old bread, because if it remains there under the hot, new, warm bread, it's going to decompose and spoil. And bread was very, very precious. It is very precious. So whenever we can assume that a person doesn't just stock up, it's not like money. You put in more money, more money, more. You don't have to clean up the old money. The old money is not going to get ruined by adding more money or more jewelry or more letters or more paperwork. But when you're dealing with something that you can assume that before you put in the new one, you take out the old one, so then the halacha will say, Nazel basa basra. I don't care about the majority. Let's say throughout the year, it's 90% used for chametz and 10% used for matzah. But now it's Pesach. Now it's Pesach. The last bread that was put in here is what? Is obviously matzah, because Pesach, you're using it Pesach. We're not talking about you don't use it for Pesach. If you never use it for Pesach, then it's not a question that it's chametz. Obviously use it for Pesach. So the last bread that's used here, obviously, is matzah. Yeah. Now, it's a type of thing that you clean out the old ones before you put in the new ones. So if we would follow, and we would ask a question, what would have been the last usage of this box, for chametz or matzah? Obviously for matzah. So if you tell me that you put in bread and you leave the old bread, it could be the last usage as matzah, but you still have chametz. But if it's a type of thing where you first clean out the old for the new, then the halacha would dictate that you can assume that this is what? Matzah and not chametz. Here there's a second incentive. In addition to the fact that you don't want the old bread to become moldy, and that's why you clean it out first before you put in the new ones, there's also the mitzvah of b'dikas chametz. That's another reason that before Pesach he got rid of the bread, because there's a mitzvah to get rid of the bread. If that's the case, why does Rav depend? Why does Rav attribute the heter to the fact that it's mostly used for chametz? It's mostly used for matzah, even if it was used 95% chametz and only 5% matzah. Nonetheless, he should still be matter this. Why? Because nazel basa basra, we should follow the last shimush, the last thing it was used for, and assume that this is, in other words, look at this bread. Say, what was this box used most recently for what? Chametz or matzah? It's the middle of Pesach. It was used for matzah. And therefore you should say that this is from the newer ones, which is matzah, because you usually clean out the old ones.
This is that, the fact that it's ibshah shows me that it's not.
Okay, one moment. How do you know this is the truth, the case? Maybe you don't follow the most recent. Maybe you follow the majority. You have to prove this. So the Gemarah says, there's a Mishnah. Miloi Tanan, haven't we learned in a Mishnah the following? You have to halt cup now a little bit. You're walking in Jerusalem and you find money in a stockyard, in the marketplace where they sell animals. Seichre behema are merchants of animals. And in that area, you're walking around where they sell animals and you find money on the floor. La'olam meiser. You always have to assume 365 days a year. You have to assume that this is sacred money. It's called meiser money. We'll see in a moment the reason. Bahar Abayis. What if you're walking on the Temple Mount, the Har Abayis, the mountain on where the Beis Hamikdash was, throughout the whole year? Chulin. You find money, you can assume it's mundane money, and you can use it any way you want. Yerushalayim. What if you find money not on the Har Abayis and not in the stockyards where they sell animals, in the marketplaces where they sell animals, in front of the stores? You find it in the streets of Jerusalem. B'shas haregel. If it's during the 3 Yomim Tovim, Pesach, Shavuos, Sukkos, Meiser. You have to assume that this money is sacred. It's called Meiser money. However, B'shayim Meiser Shana, if it's the rest of the year, you're walking today in Yerushalayim, it's talking in the time of the Beis Hamikdash, Chulin. Then you can assume that it's mundane money. V'amar Reb Shmaya Bazeda. Came Reb Shmaya Bazeda and said, my time, what's the logic? Hoyel v'shuke Yerushalayim asuyin l'skabed b'chol yom. Because the streets and the marketplaces of Jerusalem, they would sweep up every single day. This is the Mishnah and the explanation of Reb Shmaya in the Mishnah. What are we talking about? A little intro is necessary in order to understand the concept and the sequence and the relevance here. One of the tithing that was done was called Meiser Sheni. When you had produce, you had a farm or a field and you had produce, 2% approximately you had to give to the Kohen, it was called Truma. 10% you had to give to the Levi, it was called Meiser Rishon. Another 10% in the years, 3 and 6 is Meiser Ani. Right. In the years 1 and 2, right? I'm sorry, what? 1 and 2, 4 and 5. The second 10% after you give to the Levi, you have to take it to Jerusalem and eat it there. And this is sacred fruit or sacred produce. That's called Meiser Sheni. Year 3 and 6, that 10% goes to poor people. That's called Meiser Ani. And then the 7th year, everything is Hefker, and then it goes again. Years 1 and 2, Truma, Meiser Rishon, Meiser Sheni. Year 3 gets substituted with Meiser Ani. 4 and 5, Meiser Sheni. 6, Meiser Ani. And 7, you're back to Shemitah, you don't own your fields. So I take these fruits, I bring it to Yerushalayim, and I eat it there. It's sacred, I have to eat it inside of Yerushalayim. Asks the Torah, what if it's a heavy burden? You substitute it with money. And the Kedusha is conferred on the money, on the coins of Meiser Sheni, and you bring the money to Yerushalayim. This money can't be used for everything. You can't just spend it on any Jerusalem item you want. It has to be used usually for food. Most of the money of Meiser Sheni was used for people to buy sheep or goats or oxen, which they would bring as a carbon shlomim in the Beis Hamikdash, and then enjoy the meat in Yerushalayim. That was the majority of what the money was used for. When would people bring this money? When? So people who had a more luxurious life could take off 2 weeks in January, or 2 weeks in February, or 2 months, take their money of Meiser Sheni, take the family for a beautiful spiritual retreat in the holy city, and hang out there for 2 months and spend all their money and buy the food and buy the meat and eat there in Yerushalayim with the wife and the kids, and it's a beautiful thing. But not everybody can do that. So most people would take the money of Meiser Sheni and they would bring it to Yerushalayim when they were going anyway, which is Pesach, Shavuos, or Sukkos when you were anyway going. And they would spend it there during Chol HaMoed. But very often there was too much money to spend Chol HaMoed. So you're going to take it home. So you're going to take it home. It can get mixed up with other money, and it's a problem because this is holy money, sacred money. So you would give it to friends or relatives or poor people in Jerusalem, and you would tell them you're living here anyway. Nutz Gesundheit. And again, most of them would use it for buying meat. They would buy a kosher animal and use it for a carbon, and then eat the meat in the carbon shlomim. A little bit to the kohen, a little bit to him, and he could give it to the family, he can give it to the friends. This was the system. Once you understand the system, you'll now understand what the Gemarah is saying. When you find money in front of a Seicher Behema, in the area where they're selling sheep, they're selling oxen, they're selling bulls, etc., it could be you're paying with regular money, but the majority of money that was being exchanged there was what? Meiser Sheni. So when I find a coin, I don't know what this coin is, but I follow statistics. Statistically, this is holy money. So I can't take this money and go buy a newspaper. I can't take this money and go buy, cigarettes. I can't take this money and go buy my yacht or my car. I have to use this money for what you're allowed to use, Meiser Sheni money. It's not chulin money. It's not regular money. That's if I find it where? In front of Soichere Behema. Because most of the money over there was Meiser Sheni. That's the klal. That's number one. What if I find it in the Harabayas, on Harabayas, right? All year around, I say it's chulin. Why? People came to the Harabayas, they dropped a coin. Most money in the world is not Meiser Sheni. Most money in the world is chulin. So statistically, this money is mundane money. That's in the Harabayas. What about in the rest of Yerushalayim? In the rest of Yerushalayim, it depends. If it's during the holiday season, Pesach, Shavuos, Sukkot, when all the guests would come, and all the guests would bring their Meiser Sheni money, so majority of coins that were being maneuvered, that were moving around, were what? Meiser Sheni money. So if I find now on the street a coin, statistically, I say what? It's Meiser Sheni. But if it's Dalet Shvat, and I'm walking the streets of Jerusalem, now you don't have all of the guests. There may be Meiser Sheni money. You may be in Jerusalem with your Meiser Sheni money, but the majority of coins floating around Jerusalem now are not Meiser Sheni money. They are regular money. So therefore you can treat it as chulin. Ask the Reb Shmaya, why in the Harabayas don't you make the same distinction? Why in the Harabayas do you say it's always chulin? The answer is because the streets of Jerusalem they used to sweep every single day. Since they used to sweep the streets of Jerusalem every single day, so we assume that any coins that fell there during the holidays were discovered by the sweeper when they sweeped it, and therefore they picked it up. So now when you find a coin and it's not Yom Tif, it's a new coin that fell today, maybe it fell last night, maybe it fell early in the morning, and therefore it's chulin. But on the Harabayas, they never swept the Harabayas for two reasons. Number one, it was on a mountain, it was an incline, and therefore the winds would clean up on their own and they didn't have to sweep it. Number two, you weren't allowed to enter into the Harabayas with shoes and with mud and with dusty clothes. So therefore they didn't have to sweep it. So when you find coins on the Harabayas even in the middle of Yom Tif, it's very likely that it's there from 2 days ago, 5 days ago, a week ago, 2 weeks ago. And the majority of coins during the year would be chulin. So therefore on the Harabayas you can always treat it as chulin. This is how Reb Shmaya explained the difference of the Mishnah. So again, in front of a Soichere Behema, all year it's going to be Meiser Sheni. It's a suffix, but statistically I say Meiser Sheni. On the Harabayas, the opposite. All year, even in the middle of Yom Tif, it's chulin. In the streets of Jerusalem, it depends. In the middle of Yom Tif, it's Meiser Sheni. The rest of the year, it's chulin. That's what the Mishnah tells us. A Mishnah Maseches Shkalim. What do we learn from here? What do we see from this? Alma, Amrin, and we say that in a place where you sweep up, in a situation where you clean up the old, kamoi ozlile, we assume that their original money is gone, vahani acharini ninu, and the money that we found now is new money that just fell down today because yesterday's money was already cleaned up. And since it's Pesach, it's Chol HaMoed Pesach, and the coin I assume is not from before Pesach, it's from now, so therefore I say it's Meiser Sheni. But in the Harabayas, where I can't say the old money was cleaned up because they didn't sweep the Harabayas. So if somebody dropped money there Purim or Rosh Chodesh Nisan or a week before Pesach, that's the coin I may have found. It may be from the middle of Pesach, but it may be from the whole year. So statistically, if I look at 365 days a year, Pesach, Shavuos, and Sukkot is a small minority. So if I see a coin, what do I attribute it to? I attribute it to a coin that fell throughout the whole year. Maybe it also fell now, but it could have fallen a week ago, 2 weeks ago, a month ago, 5 months ago, etc. And nobody ever discovered it. I had mazel, I discovered it. So therefore, and if it fell throughout the year, you would say the preponderance of money, the majority of money would be chulin. How is this relevant now to our Gemarah? We have here a clear Mishnah that to teach us about our case. I have here a box. I have a box of bread. This is not like the Harabayas where I don't clean up. You don't, any normal person does not put in new bread hot, new, warm bread on top of the old bread. You first take out the old bread so it shouldn't get smashed, it shouldn't get moldy, it shouldn't get spoiled. So it's something that you clean up, just like the streets of Jerusalem. Before the new bread, you take out the old bread. Plus, there's a chiyuv of bdikas chametz, so there's an obligation to take out the old bread before Pesach. Considering these two factors, it's now the middle of Pesach. Maybe the majority of the box is used for chametz, just like the majority of money in Yerushalayim is chulin, not Meiser Sheni. But on Yom Tov, you don't look at the majority. What do you look at? Statistically, if I look at the majority, this coin in this street, if I go throughout the whole year, statistically, is it chulin or Meiser? Statistically, it's chulin. But since it's the middle of Yom Tov, I dismiss the concept of majority in statistics, and I say, you're right. If I compare it with the whole year, it's going to be chulin. But I'm not doing that. I'm actually looking at the most recent coin. If I'm only looking at the coins today, right, and I have to statistically say, is it Meiser Sheni or chulin? Most money that is floating around in Jerusalem now that people are carrying around are the guests, because thousands and thousands, hundreds of thousands of guests would come with their money of Meiser Sheni. They didn't come with their other money. That's where they came. They dafka came with the money of Meiser Sheni. I mean, they may have had a little chulin money, but the majority is Meiser Sheni. And therefore, that's what you look at. So I look at what is the most recent usage. What is what type of coin would have been the most recent coin that fell here? That's what I do. Here I should do the same thing. Nobody is questioning the fact that recently this box was used for what? For matzah, not for chametz. What did I use it this morning? What did I use it yesterday? What did I use it 2 days ago? Middle of Pesach. I used it for matzah. I clean up the old one. So now when I see a piece of bread and I don't know what it is, what should I say? I should say, follow the most recent usage, which is matzah, even if the majority of the year it's used for chametz, not for matzah. Why did Rav then tell me that if the majority of the year most bread in this box was chametz, not matzah, I must treat it like chametz? This is the question of the Gemarah. Let's see Rashi, who explains all of this in very clear words. So Rashi, Kivan sherav samatzah. Okay, we learned this. Says Rashi. Rashi gives us a whole presentation. Roiv oichle basa b'Yerushalayim kol yemei sashanim and moyes meiser sheni. Most people who ate meat, most eaters of meat in Yerushalayim a whole year came from the money of Meiser Sheni, which means if you saw somebody eating meat in Yerushalayim, statistically, we're not sure, but statistically you could say this meat was bought from the money of Meiser Sheni. This cow or this sheep or this goat, it was purchased with money of Meiser Sheni. That's what you can assume. Why? People are eating meat. They bought meat from a soicha behem because they want to eat like we eat meat. It's not money of Meiser Sheni. You go to the store, you pay for the behem, and you buy the meat. Why do we say this? So Rashi says, the visitors didn't manage to use up all the money of Meiser Sheni on Yom Tov. Wasn't enough time. So for a little benefit, they give it to the residents of the city, even if you don't have a friend or a relative. Yeah. For a very cheap favor, for a very cheap price, I'll give you all this money because for me to take it home is the very, very hard thing. I have to take it home and I have to protect it and I have to wash it, can't mix with anything else, and I have to bring it back. Were the people who did it? For sure, but the majority of people would do this. And the people in Yerushalayim, they're anyway living in Yerushalayim, so it's not a big deal for them to eat a carbon in Yerushalayim, to eat the meat in Yerushalayim with the holy Meiser Sheni. The Ikir Achilas, now it could be in two ways. Either they could just buy a regular animal and shecht it. You didn't have to bring a carbon. You could shecht a regular animal, and they would just eat the meat. But also that was brought from what? It was brought from Mayas Meiser Sheni that they used to eat with Kedusha. But he says even more than that. Ve'ikar achilas Mayas Meiser Shlamim Haya Meviyim and Kedekaimalam B'menachas. In fact, the most common food that they used to purchase with the money of Meiser Sheni was Karbanas Shlamim, as the Gemarah explains in Maseches Menachas Daf Pei Beis. That was the most common money. It wasn't used for. It was used probably for apples, and it could be used for any food. But nonetheless, the most common food that it was used for was meat. Hilchach loikchen man behemoths. So they would take the money and buy animals. The kolzman sheyesh le mayis meiser einay moitzi mayis chulin. And here's another principle: as long as you have money of meiser with which you could buy something, you're not going to use mayis of chulin because you want to use up the mayis of meiser because there's a kedusha in them. It's sensitive. So when you have mayis meiser, you still don't use mayis chulin. Since the people of Yerushalayim had mayis meiser, money of meiser sheni, they would use that first. And what would they use it for? They would use it first and foremost for meat. So therefore, when there's money in a marketplace of animals, money that was given to the seller, what do I say? But here's the catch. The coin fell on the floor. How do you know from whose hands it fell? Did it fall from the buyer or did it fall from the seller? If it fell from the buyer, statistically it's Meiser Sheni. But if it fell from the seller, once I give him the coins and I take the animal, now the kedusha of the coins went onto the food, right? So now this coin is chulin. So even if the money was Meiser Sheni, great, but if it fell from him, if he was the shlamazel, not me, so then the money is chulin. Rashi says you're right. Shema miyada moicher naflu moyes chulin hein, but safik isura l'chumra. Remember, this is a safik d'iraisa. This is a biblical doubt if the money is chulin or holy. So I go l'chumra stringency and I say maybe it fell from the buyer, maybe it fell from the seller. I assume it fell from the buyer, and therefore it is Meiser Sheni. Baharabayis la'olam chulin. Why? Afilu b'shas haregel. Even during Yom Tov sheyesh moyes meiser merubim b'Yerushalayim and moyes chulin, where there was more meiser money in Yerushalayim more than moyes chulin. Majority of money in Yerushalayim now being used, being spent, being transferred, being carried, falling in the ground was moyes meiser. Nonetheless, loy mesapkinen luhu b'meiser. We don't attribute to it the quality of meiser. Dazlinon basar ruba de shata. We follow the statistics of the majority of the year. I have no proof that it fell today. Maybe it fell before Yom Tov. Ubi Yerushalayim, in Jerusalem. B'shar Yom under the rest of the year it's chulin. Deroiv Ma'aser chulin, because most money being transferred in the city is mundane. Ub'shas haregel ma'aser. Could the Mefarish time, like the Gemarah explains, Ma'atam b'shas haregel ma'aser. Why do you say during Yom Tov it's ma'aser? V'lo yamdin and kaidem haregel nafel kadam din b'dim tzoyim barabayis. Why don't you say it fell down on the streets before Yom Tov? Hoya l'shvaki Yerushalayim aschumin l'schabet b'chol yom mipnei atit. They used to sweep the streets of Jerusalem every day because of the mud. V'i nafel kaidem haregel, and if it was fell before Yom Tov, have a mishtakchi b'shas kibud. The sweepers would have found it. During sweeping, it would have been found. Aval harabayis, but the Temple Mount. Mitoich sho meshupa, since it's on an incline. V'haruach mechabadetoi me'afroi. So the winds sweep up the harabayis from its dust, from its earth, from its mud, because it's on it was a pretty steep incline. V'oid, furthermore, ein adam nichnas ba'avak shal gabe raglav, you weren't allowed to walk onto the harabayis with dusty, muddy, with mud on your feet. You weren't allowed to. There were no sweepers. So therefore, you can clearly assume that the coins that fell before Yom Tov were not necessarily found, and therefore I can follow the statistics, considering the whole year and saying most of the coins here are chulin, they're not meiser sheni, even during Yom Tov. We're in the streets of Jerusalem, you must make that distinction. Alma, what do we see from here? B'chol davar asil is chabad. Anything that you would sweep up, amrinon, we say, kamoi asdu. The first coins, the earlier ones, left, they're gone. Why? Because it's likely that it was found already. Anything that's the concept of sweeping, you don't look and say, maybe it's from yesterday. I look at today. Ustam tevis shemishtamshin ben oichlin. So Rashi now comes to the punchline. Regular boxes that are used for food, noitlin rishon kadosh lo yisapshu. When you put in the new one, you take out the old one so that it shouldn't get spoiled. For kol shekain, certainly here, the mistame batka za oilar ba'asa. Here we have a second idea that he probably did bdika on the night before Pesach. V'hai de basrahi. So now when you have a piece of bread here, should you say it's from the new stock, or the old stock? The majority, a whole year, it's going to be chametz. But don't look at the majority. Look at what is the most recent stock. I see a piece. Is it from the recent stock or from the old stock? Is this something that you sweep up? Yeah, before you put in the new, you take out the old. Especially there's a mitzvah of b'dika. So I assume, that was your question, right? Before Pesach, he did b'dika. Now there's a piece of bread. What should I say about this? V'haida basrahi. This is from the most recent one. Again, if it was the harabayis, you don't say that. You know why? Because they don't clean it. If the rule was that it's coins, for example, I don't know that it's the new coins. How do I know if it's the new coins? You leave the old ones. But here you don't leave the old for the new because you don't want it to get spoiled. Plus, there's a mitzvah of b'dikas chametz. So therefore, you should say matzahi. So Rav should say a simple din. If you have a box and it's chametz or matzah, you should assume that it's matzah. Why is it matzah? You use this box for chametz a whole year and it may be chametz. You're right. But the most recent usage was matzah. So now I found a piece. Should I say it's recent or I should say old? So if I never used it for matzah, if it came Pesach and I close over the box, then obviously it's chametz because it's old stuff. But we're talking about you using it for matzah. It's very important to understand that. If there's no shaila that you're using it for matzah, then there's no question. If it's a box you just use for chametz, then it's chametz. We're talking about that you use it for Pesach. If you don't use it for Pesach, then there's no question that it's chametz. Obviously, we all have things that what we call chametz cabinets. No one asks, no one wonders if it's matzah or not. Here, obviously, he's using it for Pesach. That means new bread came in. So assume that the old one was left, especially b'dikas chametz, and say that it's matzah. Gewaldike shaila l'chayra on Rav. So the Gemarah says, you're right. You're 100% right. Of course you're right. But let me ask you a question. Let's go back to our Jerusalem example. It's the middle of Yom Tov, right? And you see a coin there. And you say it's Meiser Sheni money. Because if it fell a week ago, somebody would have found it, right? They say a story. They say it about Reb Chaim Brisk. I don't know if it's happened with him, what happened with somebody else. With a Gadol B'Yisrael, that his father woke him up very, very early to go to shul. Extremely early. It was like, for Vasikin before sunrise. And on the way going to shul, or the way going to shul, they found a golden coin in the street. So his father says, you see, this is the schar, this is the reward for waking up early. You wake up early, and this is what you find. He says, actually, the guy who woke up even earlier dropped it. So I'm not sure this is the reward. But in any case, so you found this coin here in Jerusalem. So you say, when did it fall? It fell today. It didn't fall a week before Pesach, because it would have been found. And that's why I say it's Meiser Sheni. But what if you could see the coin, and you could see that this coin is not used anymore? What if this coin is ancient coin that went out of use, right? Nobody uses it anymore. So now what are you going to say? What you're going to say is, right? I have no choice but to say that it must be old and the sweepers missed it. That's what the Gemarah is going to say. We understood Rav. Why is the pas moldy? Why did he say that it's moldy? So you don't recognize it. No, now the Gemarah says, no. He was very meticulous. Shiny achad, this is different. The ipusha meichiach ilave. It's old. It's so spoiled. That's what you said. It's old bread. That's the point. Yes, you have all beautiful explanations to tell me that this is from the batch of matzah. Follow the newest. Granted. But what if you look at it and you see that it's not new? It's very old. Rashi, Meichiach alei, Sharehu zeh yamim rabim. This guy is an old man. V'chametzu. It's a shtik chametz. That's the problem. Therefore, Rav can't follow the logical consideration that the most recent usage should trump majority. That works if I could say that this comes from the recent bread. In other words, it comes from the Pesach bread. But that's what he said. He didn't say you don't know if it's chametz or matzah. If he would have said you don't know if it's chametz or matzah, very good. He gave an intro, hapasha ipsha. It's spoiled. So we might have thought he said that simply to give a practical illustration of why you don't know. No, that was his point. His point is it's spoiled, it's old, it's ancient. So when you look at it, you see this guy is not a fresh piece of bread. This piece of bread is a shtickle over bottle. He's old. If he's old, meaning Pesach has not been forever. He comes from before Pesach. He comes from before Pesach, and this is a box used for chametz. So obviously it's chametz. So the Gemarah says, okay, got it. But now we have the opposite problem. Really? If the spoiledness demonstrates that it's old, what do I gain from the fact that if the majority of this box is used for matzah, I can use it? You're telling me that I can't follow. the recent circumstances, because this is not recent. This is an old piece that comes from before Pesach, so therefore I can't say it's matzah, I say it's chametz. So Rav tells me, but if the majority of the box is used more for matzah than for chametz, then I could use this as matzah. What does it help? If I see that it's from before Pesach, even let's say it's used Pesach non-stop, yeah? It's used 1,000 pieces of matzah in the box and 500 pieces of chametz in the box. 80% matzah and 20% chametz. But if you could see that this comes from before Pesach, because if not, then you would say what? If you can't see that it comes before Pesach, then you would say what? Then you would say it's from the recent batch. That's more logical. But you can't say that. Why? Because it's too old for that. So obviously it comes from the old, before B'dikas Chametz. If that's the case, then what does it help that statistically most of this box has matzah in it? Rashi. Okay, no. Answers the Gemarah, Amar Rabba. Rabba says, you're right. We completely misunderstood Rav. You misunderstood him. Loi teime sheraf sa matzah. Rav did not mean that the matzah is used more than chametz. That's not what he meant. Ela eime, he meant sherabu yemei matzah ilave. That the majority of the days of matzah have already passed. Rav sa matzah does not mean that this box is used more for matzah than for chametz. That would be completely irrelevant here. I don't care how much it's used for matzah. I don't care how much it's used for chametz. If this piece of matzah, if this piece of bread is a moldy, spoiled piece of bread, and obviously it's old, so it doesn't come from the new bag, it doesn't come from the new batch. I say it comes from the old batch, right? It's like the harabayas. And therefore, how can I know that it's matzah? It could be very likely be chametz. So Rabbi says the pshat is completely different. Rav Samatzah doesn't mean most days of Pesach passed. Rav Samatzah doesn't mean it's used mostly for matzah. It means most days of Pesach passed. Why is that relevant? Because Rashi says Ravu Yemei HaMatzah v'royu liyos me'upesh m'shenichnas HaPesach. Because most of the days of Pesach passed, so therefore it's very likely that it's spoiled after Pesach. If it would have been the second day of Pesach, it couldn't have been a Pesach child because it's so spoiled. But since it's, let's say, the 7th day of Pesach or the 8th day of Pesach, so therefore you could say what? That it got spoiled when? On Pesach. In other words, it's matzah. If that's the case, pshita, then obvious. Then you need psachidish of Rav. I don't understand you. You find a piece of bread in your house. Yeah, why should you assume it's chametz? Rashi says, Ihachi pshita. A philosophic leka. The mistame vaday botka va matzah. We assume a Jew did bdikas chametz, and this is matzah. What's Rav's chiddush? What is he telling me? You found a piece of bread. It's spoiled, right? Most of Pesach went by. This is a box that used to be used for chametz. Now it's used for matzah. Why should I assume that it's chametz? Say a Jew did bdikas chametz. He cleaned up the chametz, and now there's a piece of bread. It's matzah. Like what's Rav telling me? It doesn't know. You don't need statistics. You don't need majority. It's Pesach of the Welt. Pesach of the Welt. So it's matzah. What's the problem? In other words, if it's so old that it had to be from before Pesach, then I have the opposite problem. Then how can I say that it's matzah? I have to say that it's chametz. It comes from a time when it was used for chametz, right? Elamai, you're telling me that it was in a situation that you can attribute it to Pesach. Already most of the Pesach passed. That's what he says. Apasha ibsha. Kivin sherafsa matzah. What's rafsa matzah? Rafsa yemei hamatzah. The days of matzah have passed, most of them, and therefore it could get spoiled on Pesach. Great. So if it gets spoiled on Pesach, so what's the chiddush? Why should you even think that it's chametz? We assume every Jew did bdikas chametz. He cleaned up the box, and if there's bread there, it's matzah. What's the problem?
It spoils. Matzah never spoils.
Huh?
Matzah never spoils.
Our matzah doesn't spoil. I told you, their matzah was like pita bread. Spoils very fast.
Even though it was matzah.
It's not matzah. What you're calling matzah is not matzah. What you're calling matzah is our invention of matzah. That's not matzah. Matzah just means that the dough wasn't fermented. Their matzah was as soft as pita. Yeah, yeah, it spoils, yeah. And they used to bake it in the middle of Pesach also. And for the Gemarah, lo tzricha. I'll tell you the issue. Ipusha meruba. You have spoiled and you have spoiled. This piece of bread is it's excessively spoiled. In other words, it appears to be not old, but very old. So now I can look at it in two ways. Mao the time I would say, kivun de pusha meruba. Since it's abundantly spoiled, igloya milsa, this reveals to me the vadei chametz ma'al yehu, that this is absolute chametz. Either it was bdikas chametz, I'm forced to say that he made a mistake, he overlooked it. Somehow his bdikas chametz failed. He missed the box, whatever. The box was hidden. Something happened. I wouldn't say this logically. I assume Kol Yisrael b'cheskas kashrus that he did b'dikas chametz, and this passes matzah. It's not chametz. But I have a problem here. The problem here is it looks very old. Because it looks very old, I might think that you have to assume that it's ancient, meaning it comes from before Pesach. Before Pesach, it was used for chametz. It was chametz. What happened with b'dikas chametz? You made a mistake. Your b'dikas chametz wasn't perfect. You missed something. Maybe you were in a rush, you were tired, you were stressed, you didn't see the box, whatever it is. Kamash Malon, that's what Rav says. No, don't go there. Since the majority of the days of Pesach have passed. In other words, I can also attribute the spoiledness of this piece of bread to have happened in the middle of Pesach as a result of so many days that passed. So even though it looks so old, and you could say that it's from before Pesach, but since I don't have to say it's before Pesach, I can assume it's the middle of Pesach. Amrinon, that's what we do. We say, Kol Yoima v'Yoima, every single day, Nama Chamima of. This fellow bakes warm bread. As I told you, they used to bake their matzah on Pesach. It would come morning. We're used to bakeries and commercial matzah as a business. That industry didn't work that way. Everyone baked their own matzah. For the Seder, you baked matzah erev Pesach, and then you baked matzah. The kids needed bread. You baked matzah every day of Pesach. You took your wheat, you grinded your wheat, you had your kernels, and you made your dough, and you made your matzah. In the middle of the year, you didn't care if it became chametz. On Pesach, you made sure that it didn't become chametz. It had the same flavor, the same texture, it looked the same, etc. Now it becomes moldy and you're not sure if it's before or after, but you could say it's after. So we say, Kol Yom V'Yom Nama Chamim. Every day of Pesach, this fellow baked warm matzah. Ushada aloye. And he threw it on top of the one from the previous day. And that's why it got so moldy. In other words, you don't have to attribute it to the fact that it's really, really old. You can attribute it to the fact that throughout Pesach you eat matzah, you eat a lot of matzah. He baked every day warm bread and he put it in this basket, and as a result of that, this poor piece of matzah became more spoiled than usual, even though it happened in the middle of Pesach. Rashi. Right? If the most of Pesach passed, so this is what the Gemarah answers, that you could go both ways. So therefore, it's a chiddush of Rav. Without Rav, I would say, you find a piece of chametz, you find a piece of bread, I'm not sure. Maybe I should treat it as chametz. That's his chiddush. As long as you could say that it happened on Pesach, we don't say this Jew failed in b'dikas chametz. We say he did a good b'dikas chametz. And therefore, there's no way that this would have been a piece of chametz. It's so old. If you can at least give a logical explanation why it looks so old, assuming you did b'dikas chametz, that's what you do. If you can't, of course, if it's so old that it's obvious that it comes from before Pesach, then you have no choice and you have to say, yeah, your b'dikas chametz failed. Just like today's day, if you find a piece of bread under your couch and you know it's not matzah, you don't say, well, I did b'dikas chametz. Well, you did b'dikas chametz, but you didn't do a good job, and obviously it's chametz. Obviously that's the case. But that's the chiddush of Rav, that in this case, it would be mutter. But taka in a case where you could attribute it to the most recent, we would attribute it to the most recent, not a question. In other words, if it's not spoiled, then there's no question. If it's not spoiled, what are you going to say? You're going to say there was b'dikas chametz, and this is matzah, it's not chametz. If it's not spoiled, you're not going to say it's from before Pesach, even if it's the first day of Pesach. The chiddush here is, even though there are arrows pointing to before Pesach, you don't say it if you don't have to. Why? Because you could say that there's a metzius where it could become so old.
Suppose we go with the basra. You still use with the basra?
We go basa basra, and and we have the b'dikas chametz. The b'dikas chametz adds a tremendous.
Because normally we should have go with the chiller. Because we go with the basra, we go with the chiller.
We go basa basra and we say there was b'dikas chametz. There was b'dikas chametz. Since there was b'dikas chametz, so therefore you can eat the bread. You can treat it as matzah. B'dikas chametz makes this basra. You understand? Like by the coins. B'dikas chametz makes it basra. Because if there was no concept of b'dikas chametz, there was no concept of cleaning up the old, so basra doesn't help. You know what I mean? Why should you go basa basra? Just like the coins, they could be from today, they can also be from a month ago, they could be from a week ago. Why is this better than this? Basa basra trumps statistics. Even though it's used more for chametz than for matzah, that becomes irrelevant. If you don't have a choice, if you can't attribute it to Pesach, if you can't say it's basra, if you have to say it's kama, because it's so old, so even though there's proof that it is basra because b'dikas chametz, but you have other proof that there was no good b'dikas chametz because it's so old, so you can't fight reality. So you have to say it's chametz. Frag the Gemarah umias lina basa basra. Do you always follow the basra? Is that true? Vahatanya. Let me show you a brayso clearly the opposite. Rabbi Yossi bar Yehuda says, very interesting case. You have teva, you have a box for money. This is the place you use money. So sometimes you put in money of chulin, sometimes you put in moyes of meiser sheni. Here's the problem. You find a coin, it's just there, and you don't know which one it is. Roiv chulin, roiv meiser. You follow statistics. If you say, throughout the year, yeah, how much chulin is money here, how much is meiser here? You say chulin, 1,000 coins. Meiser, 50 coins. I find now a coin. I don't know which one it is. I goes with statistics. And I follow the majority. If the majority is chulin, it's chulin. Majority of meiser is meiser. Now let's understand. We assume that a person will not put in both coins together, chulin and meiser, because you don't want it to get mixed up. Therefore, when you finish using it for meiser, let's say you're keeping it there till you go to Jerusalem, what do? You clean it up, you boidik it, you make sure there's no meiser shen, and then you put in chulin. When you finish using it for chulin, you want to put in for meiser, you're not just going to put in the chulin money, because you stop wasting money. You first clean up the old, and you put in the new. Remember, this is a concept where you're going to clean up the old before you put in the new, because you don't want them to be mixed up, right? It's one of those. If that's the case, why do you follow statistics? V'amai, lezel basa basra. Go according to the last usage. That's what you should do. Again, if you don't clean up the old to put in the new, then I have to look at the whole year. So I say, what's the majority of coins that this chest contains? Granted. But it's not that situation. You clean up the meiser before you put in chulin. You clean up the chulin before you put in meiser, for obvious reasons. You don't want the two monies to get mixed. This money has to be taken to Yerushalayim, the whole other halach. If that's the case, what do we say? What did we establish? You don't follow statistics. What do you follow? You look at the last circumstances. So now you found a coin. Why don't you ask one question? What was this used for yesterday? What was this used for last week? What was this used for last month? What was the last thing this box was used for? If it was used for chulin, assume that this money is what? Chulin. It's leftover. If it was used for meiser, assume that it's meiser. Just like we explained by Yerushalayim. If you look at the whole year, it's mostly chulin. But you're looking today. Today it's Yom Tov. Yom Tov, I say, this coin, what was the last coin that fell here? Meiser Sheni. And for the Gemarah, what do we see from here? That it's not so simple. It may be statistics are more important than the last use. And the logic would be, yes, he cleaned it up, but maybe he didn't clean it up well. So that's a whole other perspective. For the Gemarah, Amar Reb Nachman bar Yitzchak, no, you're misunderstanding. And this is talking about a case he used it for both, but he doesn't know what was the last usage. That's the problem. It's very nice if he knows what he used it last week for, but he doesn't remember. He knows I use it for this, I use it for this. I don't remember what was the last one. So what do I do now with this? So now I have a coin. I can't say what was here last because I don't know what was here last. If I would know, it wouldn't be a problem, but I can't. So what do I have to follow? So I look at the whole year and I say statistically, it's meiser chulin based on the majority. Second best option. Reb Zvid Amar, Reb Zvid says, you use them both simultaneously, each one in a separate sibur, in a separate bag. You put one in a bundle in one corner, the other one in a bundle in another corner. So now, you took them both out and there's a coin left. You say, what was it used last? Well, it was used for both. I don't know which one it is, right? Or even if they're both there and there's a coin somewhere in the middle, where do you say, what was it used last? It's used for both. I don't know. So I have to go according to the majority. Rav Papa says, going to shtakach beguma. A third situation, you could explain it is, you found a coin in a cavity. Inside the box, there's a hole, an indentation, and that's where you found it. If that's the case, we can't say follow the last time it was used because the previous one was cleaned up if the coins are there. But this coin obviously fell into some hole, so it's very obvious, very likely that it was overlooked by this person when he cleaned up the last money. So here's a special situation where cleaning it doesn't help. It would be like the streets of Jerusalem. If there's a hole and the coin is found deep in a hole where it doesn't get swept up, you're not going to say on that coin that it's Meiser Sheni because it fell today, because if it fell yesterday, it would have been swept up. It would have not been swept up. So now you follow just the general statistics. I don't know what this coin is, so I follow the majority. But we still maintain the idea that Basar Basra is more important than Basar Kama. I want to conclude here with two things. First of all, a line from Rabbeinu Hananel, and then how it works halacha l'maisa. If you take a look on the left of your Gemarah, Rabbeinu Hananel, just a very interesting line that he puts in. Pas she'ipsha, you see it's in the middle of Rabbeinu Hananel, very small letters on the left side probably of your Gemarah. Pas she'ipsha. The line starts she'ipsha in Rabbeinu Hananel. Pas she'ipsha, you got it? V'lo yada imatza ichametzu. Im rabu yumei matzah, if it's the majority of Pesach has passed, muteresi, it's muter. Pirush, achar ha-Pesach. Only after Pesach. Here we see Rabbeinu Hananel interprets this Gemara completely different. He believes that you're not allowed to eat this on Pesach. Why? Because even if you have a slight doubt, because it's a Safek D'Oraisa, and perhaps it's an Isser Kares to eat chametz, so therefore, he doesn't want to rely on any statistics. Even saying there was b'dikas chametz and it got spoiled on Pesach. No. After Pesach, you can eat it, which is a chiddush. Because chametz shavar alav Pesach, you're not allowed to eat. But that's only an issur d'Rabbanan. It's not an issur min haTorah. So therefore, he says, wait till after Pesach and then eat it. Even if it's chametz, no. But on Pesach, he doesn't even think that Rav said you're allowed to eat it. That's the shitta of Rabbeinu Hananel. It's not the shitta of the other Mefarshim, but that's his shitta. Even if you hold a chametz shavuot Pesach is also min haTorah, still not an Isser Kares. But on Pesach, it's an Isser Kares. What is...
You could say that because if you found something which is Safek D'Oraisa, which could be chametz, he has to do beer.
Right, so he doesn't say you have to do beer. You could leave it, because that's not an Isser Kares. By Yerobah Yemotze is not an Isser Kares. So he lets you keep it because we say that it's matzah, but he doesn't let you eat it. He lets you keep it because he says you're allowed to eat it after Pesach. That means you could keep it. Very interesting. You may be over on by Yerabah Yemotze. That's true, but it's not an Isser Kares. But eating it, digesting it, that's what it seems. He doesn't say this, but that's what it seems.
There is a mitzvah of beer.
There's a mitzvah of beer on chametz, not on matzah.
But it says Safek. It has a sfeik.
It's a Safek, but it's a Safek D'Oraisa, but that's the point. That it's a Safek D'Oraisa. That's Safek D'Oraisa l'chumra means if it's a Safek, but here the Safek stands against many other statistics. The statistic is that you did b'dikas chametz and you did a good b'dikas chametz. So it's not a Safek anymore. You understand? Right. Safek D'Oraisa l'chumra means that it's an absolute Safek. Here the point is it's not a Safek. It would have been a Safek if we remove the idea that a Jew does b'dikas chametz. But since a Jew does b'dikas chametz, and this could have gotten spoiled on Pesach, so we say it's not a Safek anymore. It's a Vadai. Is it a real Vadai? Of course it's not a real Vadai, because people can overlook things. But the halacha says it's a Vadai. But Rabbeinu Hananel does not rely on it. He says that Rav is only talking about after Pesach. It's a big chiddush. It's a big chiddush of Rabbeinu Hananel. No, he found it in the middle of Pesach. He doesn't say he found it after Pesach. He says, where are you going to say he found it? Huh? Im rabu yemei matzah muteresi pirush achar Pesach. It's muter after Pesach. That's what it seems. The way this is halacha l'maisa It's in Shulchan Aruch in Siman Taf Mem Vav. I'll read from here. I don't see a Shulchan Aruch here. Orach Chaim Siman Taf Mem Vav. Just gedai to mention it. I'll read from Shulchan Aruch Harav Siman Taf Mem Vav in Hilchas Pesach. So this is how the sugya is summed up, halacha l'maisa. Okay, in Turin and Shulchan Aruch, all here in Siman Taf Mem Vav. If somebody finds bread in his house on Pesach and he doesn't know if it's chametz or matzah, again, this is without spoiled. When you have to sum up the sugya, right? If somebody finds a piece of pita, so you don't get confused, a piece of pita, Yemenite pita, in your house on Pesach, and you don't know if it's chametz or matzah, the answer is, you say it's matzah, and you're allowed to eat it. It's certainly matzah. Why? Because every Jew does b'dikas chametz before Pesach, and we assume that he got rid of all the chametz that was in his house, and hence, when there's a piece of bread in the house on Pesach, we say what? That it's matzah. There's no reason to say he didn't do b'dikas chametz, and therefore it's a piece of chametz. Even though it could be, because it doesn't have the identifying feature of matzah, but that's the chiddush here. That what? You say it's matzah bevadai, and therefore you could eat it. Again, according to Rabbeinu Chananel, that's not the case, right? And that's one shitta in halacha. The Mishnah Berurah discusses it. But generally speaking, most poskim say you can eat it on Pesach. Gevaldik avart. Why? B'dikas chametz was a good b'dikas chametz. You don't know if it's chametz or matzah. I don't have to know. I know that I'm a Jew, and I got rid of my bread before Pesach. So if I find bread anywhere, on the couch, in the pantry, even if I find it in a hole, I'm not afraid that you missed it, because we assume that you did a good b'dikas chametz, and b'dikas chametz is done b'chayrim u'bizdakim. It's done in crevices, it's done in holes. But that's only if the hole is exposed, so you could see it during b'dikas chametz, and you probably did b'dikah. But if you found it somewhere in a concealed hole, for example, under a box, but not in the hole, it's covered by the lower planks, and therefore it's hard to see. So here there is a concern that he overlooked it, which may be not because he didn't do a good b'dikas chametz, but because it's so concealed, and you have to get rid of this chametz immediately. Not only you're not allowed to eat it, you have to get rid of it, because it's a piece of chametz in your house, and even if you did bittul only helps from minat Torah, but still midirabbanan, you have to get rid of it. What happens if you find bread in the middle of your house, but it is spoiled? It's mu'ipsha. So if it's a situation that it was impossible to get spoiled from when Pesach began or from when you baked matzahs, during these days when we bake all of our matzahs before Pesach, so if it's a situation that from that time, let's say you baked matzahs 2 weeks before Pesach, right? You baked pita 2 weeks before Pesach. So if you can say that it's spoiled so badly since that time because it's too little time to attribute so much mold to it, so then it's recognizable that it's certainly chametz. Why? Because even though you did b'dikas chametz, you're right. But look at this. It's obvious that it couldn't have happened since Pesach. Let's say you baked your matzah on Pesach, and this didn't happen on Pesach. This happened from before. Or even if you baked matzah before Pesach, but this is too spoiled to be able to attribute it to that time. So then obviously it's chametz, and you have to get rid of it right away, right? That's where Rav said that the only reason you say it's mutter here is because you could say that it happened on Pesach, so then you do say. But here you can't say it. So therefore you're going to say you're not allowed to keep it in your house. But if so many days of Pesach went by, or you baked your matzahs a long time before Pesach, and therefore you could say clearly that what? That it got spoiled after Pesach, or it got spoiled after you baked the matzah before Pesach. But what got spoiled? Matzah, not chametz. So then, toilin lahakel. We look at the lenient route, and you're allowed to eat it. Why? Because you did b'dikas chametz before Pesach, and therefore we say the Shulchan Aruch paskins, since you did b'dika before Pesach, as Rashi explains, therefore you're allowed to eat it. And if in that house they bake warm bread every single day, if it's a house where they have a minig, that every 4 o'clock in the morning the balabasta gets up and bakes fresh, warm bread, then even if the bread is so spoiled and you would certainly want to say that it's old, but because it's a house where they bake warm bread every day, then even if this bread is so spoiled, you still follow the lenient route and you say that because he baked warm bread every single day and he placed it on this old bread, therefore the matzah became so spoiled. Which means if there's any way of saying that the b'dikas chametz was a good b'dikas chametz, you say that. Even if you have to push it. And you could say, no, it's old. No, it's not old. It's new. But because this is a house where they bake warm bread every day and they place it here, unless you know that he doesn't place it here. But if you know that he places it here and you can attribute it to that, then that's how we attribute and we explain the mold and the spoiledness based on that. And therefore you could say it's matzah and you could eat it according to the halacha. If it's a piece of cake, we know that it's chametz. You're right. I had a maisa once. When I was a bacher, I found in my house, my parents' house, I remember the second day of Yom Tov, I was sitting on the couch, I was reading something, and I picked up the pillow just to straighten it out. I found a nice big tray of cookies, and I remember I went to my mother screaming, and she took a look, and she said that one of my nieces was there, one of my nephews was there, and they came with the Pesach cookies, and it was fine. Huh? So that was good, yeah. It would be good. If it's a piece of cake that could be kosher l'Pesach. So then, yeah. Yeah. If you did b'dikas chametz, and it could be Pesach, that you assume it's Pesach, and you can eat it. That's the whole vart. You assumed there was a good b'dikas chametz, and it's Pesach, the food. That's the. You could throw it away, and there is such a shitta. Rabbeinu Chananel holds like that. Mishnah Brura brings it. There is such a shitta because you're dealing with kares.
So today this Gemarah is more relevant to Pesach cookies, and this is more
Pesach cookies would be a very similar situation. You find a Pesach brownie. Well, the truth is, if you look a little, if you know a little bit, you could see it's. But if you if you taka can see, theoretically, if you taka anybody, if you know a little bit, you could see. But you're saying in a situation where you can't see, it's mutter even to eat. Yeah. Again, you have to be practical. If you know for sure that in this house nobody would have brought in a Pesach brownie. For example, some houses they don't allow Pesach snacks. They have a chumrah, right? They don't allow all these things. Till your grandchildren come, yeah. Depends on the standards of your daughter-in-law and your son, right? But let's say we know that this house, then obviously, again, you only say it's kosher l'Pesach, it's matzah if you can explain it. If you know that in this house, kosher l'Pesach brownies don't come in, then I have no choice. I have to say it's chametz. Again, we're talking about in a case where you could say that there's kosher l'Pesach brownies. I don't have to say it's chametz. I shouldn't say it's chametz. I can eat it.
How do they make that thick?
Gavaldik avor. This is the Chiddush of Rav. The Chiddush of Rav is a pasha ipsha, which means it's very old. So naturally you would say it's a shtickle chametz. But since most of Pesach passed, kivat sharav samatzah. B'meila, you can attribute it to what? To the fact that it got spoiled on Pesach. And what? And he bakes bread every single day. So you can go both ways. I say that it's matzah. Gevaldik avort. No question. No question. Today, people would say throw it out. By them, a piece of bread you did not throw out. You have to remember that most people, there were complete civilizations that died from hunger. Famine was as predictable as sunrise. You know what I mean? The rain didn't rain one winter. There's no such a thing. You bring food from another country, you go to the store, you have food stamp, surplus. It didn't exist. Of course. If there was one season, there was no rain, right? If a storm came and knocked it out, people would starve that year. There was no jokes. It wasn't like, I'll go to the store and buy challah from somewhere. I'll go to the shul and find challah. It was very, very such a serious situation. You found a piece of bread. You didn't just say throw it out.
Today, if you went to a rabbi, you would say we threw it away.
Today we should follow the Rabbeinu Chananel rather.
I mean, yeah.
Yeah, today, Baruch Hashem, nobody needs that piece of bread, so throw it out. You could burn it also if you want.
The halacha didn't change,
But the halacha still didn't change.
The way we are.
The halacha still didn't change. Although the Mishnah Berurah says, interestingly, I'll just read it to you. It's very interesting how he puts it. Because the Shulchan Aruch Rav Paskins like the Shulchan Aruch, and he explains it. Mishnah Berurah Siman Tov Mem Vav. It's unbelievable without Svarim what you have today. Rebbe says this whole halacha is basically how it used to work in the olden days, that the matzahs were very thick, or at least a little thick, and nobody knew the difference between chametz and matzah. What? Chametz the matzah, you say?
Yeah, it looks the same, really, no? Today, it's
Biur halacha. Oh, so he says like this. Very interesting. The Rif, this halacha is brought in Torah and Shulchan Aruch. I mentioned that you could eat the bread in Shulchan Aruch Harav. So he says the Rif, the Rambam, and the Rosh, not the Torah and Shulchan Aruch, did not put in this din. They ignored this halacha in Gemarah. It's a question why. Okay? He says, but when you see the Rabbeinu Hananel, and he says that it only applies after Pesach, because the middle of Pesach is Karis, so therefore don't try to be lenient, because it's a Chash Chametz Gomer. Wait till after Pesach, where it's only an Issur D'Rabbanan, and even Chav Chametz Shabbat Pesach, and even it's an Issur D'Oraisa, it's not Karis. So he says maybe the Rambam and the Rif and the Rosh, because they weren't clear if Rabbeinu Hananel is right or not right, and if he's right, then the Gemarah never said you're allowed to eat it on Pesach. If you have any suffix, even if you could say it's matzah, you're not allowed to eat it. So therefore, maybe they didn't put in the halacha. But the fact is that the Torah and the Shulchan Aruch did put it in and said you could eat it. So the Mishnah Berurah just says that Lamaisa, it would certainly one should not be lenient in the middle of Pesach against Rabbeinu Hananel. Should call dvarav him divrei Kabbalah. That's what he says. That's what the Bir Halacha of the Mishnah Berurah, the Chavetz Chaim writes. Very interesting.
Essentially, there is no fixed date. You have to make your own assumption if it could happen from Pesach or
Yes,
not. So
yes.
it's up to everyone to make.
You have to make you have to make your own assumption, 100%. How do they make the thick matzah? They still do it in some places. It just comes with a lot of problems. It's just there's much more concerns because the thicker it is, right? Our matzah. Why do we make our matzah? You want to know? Let me explain to you how we made it. Our matzah is very, very hard. It's also very thin. Why? Push it, and we put holes. You put it into the oven. They leave it in the oven for around 20 seconds, 30 seconds. Why is it always burnt? Because it's so thin. If you leave it in another 20, 30 seconds, you end up with ashes, with charcoal. You can't eat it. So we make it very, very thin. It bakes extremely, extremely fast, right? You take it out immediately. There's much less concern that it's going to become chametz. It's very, very thin. Huh?
The water's all dried up. The water's all dried up.
The water gets dried up so fast. It's such heat. Yeah. And it's so thin. It's so thin. As you leave it in the oven for longer. If it's thicker, you have to leave it in the oven longer. So even though...
If it's thicker, they leave it longer.
If it's thicker, you could leave it longer.
Yeah, you could.
I know that gluten-free matzah is thick.
Yeah. So that's how they used to do it. There were matzahs, I read, there was one of the Rishonim writes, the matzahs thick a tefach. A tefach.
And soft, like you could bend it.
Yeah.
Today we say it's chametz if it's that thick.
Imagine matzah that was thick a tefach, like this. Look how thick, matzah like this.
That means it still has moisture in it.
But it was matzah, it wasn't chametz. Like a bulka, yeah, mamish like a bulka. Even, I believe, in Yemen, they would make, till recently, maybe even recently, like a pita. Matzah like a pita. It's very geschmack matzah. Koirech, people think matzah is very nice. It was koirech, yeah? They had the Beis HaMikdash, they had lamb chops with lettuce, with charoises. It was a very nice sandwich. Huh? It was like a burger. People don't realize. Keno Sahilo. You have pita bread with lamb chops, yeah? And you have morer, a spicy, a beautiful, beautiful food. Today we're left with matzah and lettuce, okay? Yeah. Yeah. I was in a Pesach program, breakfast, pizza, bagels, thick bread. So that's what we're talking about. That's what the Mishnah Berurah says. So they don't know. They don't know if it's chametz or matzah. Huh? Our oven is very hot. What do you mean?
When we make thick bread, I don't know if you can do it with such a hot oven. It's burning the whole thing.
Right, you can't do it with such a hot oven. So it takes more time. It's a smaller fire. So you just have to be more careful, and that's why they stopped doing it. By us, they stopped doing it. They just make flat matzah, very, very thin, bakes like this. It gets burnt. And there's a less chash chametz, but it's not how they used to do it. We also do it all before Pesach. We don't do anything in the middle of Pesach. Why? Because before Pesach, chametz gets bottled. After Pesach, chametz doesn't get bottled. So if there's a little crumb that's chametz dick, it doesn't get bottled. So I'm saying we did all of these chumras that didn't necessarily apply in this man of the Gemarah. That's what the Gemarah says. You could bake matzah every day of Pesach, and that's why it became so spoiled. Today, that's not a possibility. That's what the Shulchan Aruch Harav says. If you're not baking bread every day of Pesach, and therefore this thing is spoiled not from the warm bread that you put on it, you have to attribute it to the fact that it's chametz. Okay.